on today's Story Beat.
What matters the most is your character. It's not how much money you have. It's not what you've accomplished. It's not what you're going to accomplish. It's not the failures. It's your character. Your character is everything. Everybody's got a window of time when you're relevant, and then your time ends and you're out of there, and making sure that that character and that integrity are not violated, compromised. I mean, you should always be compromising, but don't get compromised.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Dr. Niyi Coker Jr., is a professor and the director of the School of Theater, Television, and Film at San Diego State University in California, which is ranked by The Hollywood Reporter as a top 10 film production program. Niyi has served as visiting artistic director to several theater companies, including K3 at Malmo Hogskola in Sweden, the National Theater of Nigeria, the Black Box Theater in Bermuda, and he's also the founding artistic director of the African Arts Ensemble in New York City. Niyi's plays include Ore, written in collaboration with the Southern Ute Tribal Council, commissioned and sponsored by the British Council. It toured England, and also Preemptive, a drama about Islamophobia, initially developed at the Indiana University Playwrights Lab and staged at London's West End Shaw Theatre. Niyi's Off-Broadway writing and directing credits include Booth, a musical on the reflections of Edwin Booth after the assassination of Lincoln, written in collaboration with Barbara Harbach and Jonathan Yordy. Miriam Makeba-Mama Africa, the musical, about the struggles of the anti-apartheid singer and civil rights advocate. Niyi's also made features and documentary films, including Black Studies USA and Pennies for the Boatman. His most recent documentary, Otto Benga, Human at the Zoo, is the true story of an African kidnapped from the continent and put on display at the Bronx Zoo. Niyi is the founding director of the Africa World Documentary Film Festival, which is in its 14th season. The festival screens in numerous countries worldwide. He's the author of 2 books, The Music and Social Criticism of African Musician Fela Kuti, and Ola Ratimi's African Theater, The Development of an Indigenous Aesthetic. Further, Niyi has contributed numerous chapters and articles to books, journals, and magazines. Niyi is a full member of the Society for Stage Directors and Choreographers, and he's also a recipient of the Kennedy Center Merit Award in Directing. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great privilege for me to welcome the visionary writer, director, and educator, the terrifically multi-talented Dr. Niyi Coker Jr. to StoryBeat today. Niyi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm glad this finally is happening, Steve. Thank you. I'm very honored.
Indeed, indeed. The honor is all mine. Trust me on that. So let me ask you, do you think of yourself with all of these skills that you have and all this talent that you have, do you think of yourself primarily as one thing or another, as a writer or a director or a choreographer or educator, or some combination of all of those?
Combination of all of it, actually.
All
The truth is a combination of all of it, because the combination is a good one for me in the sense that it lends to more empathy when you find yourself working on one side or the other. As a director, you know what the actor's going through, you know what the producers are going through. You, as an actor, you know what the director's going through, what the designers are going through. As an educator, you know what the students are going through, and when you have them work on their production. So all of it.
So you're able to relate to all those different perspectives, and it's many different hats. Do you have to put on different hats and think differently as you're doing each of those things, or are they somehow all interweaved?
I think they're interwoven. They're all very much interwoven. I just believe it's the level of execution with each of them. As a director, of course, you know, you have to bring the team together.
Sure.
It's got to be a team spirit. It's not an I, it's all of us, and you got to make everybody feel like it's their own project. It's not just yours alone, and your ego sits, check your ego out there.
I think you're among the fairly rarest of the rare. You have all of those skill sets and you've been achieving success at all of them. But my question for you right now is, you're the artistic director of a university division, like the School of Theater, Television, and Film at SDSU. How does one rise to become that?
I don't think it's that you plan to rise to. I mean, you certainly have your eye on the prize like that, but in my case, I just found I focused on my work, and things happened as I focused on my work, and I got better at certain things. I got better at, I hate to say this, administrative skills.
That's what being in school is all about. You got to have the administrative skills.
I got better at administrative skills, and
you probably got really good at meetings.
Yeah. I got good at meetings and learned to behave myself and not, scream, "Hey, this is madness! What are we doing? What are we talking about?" You kind of begin to understand that there is a process that's very slow, and which you would not have understood if you hadn't grown through that process. If you were jumping in straight from, say, working as artistic director of a theater, and you jumped straight into an administrative position at the university, it's not going to work.
You'd go crazy at first because
it's not going to work.
Because, like you said, I think that you said the key word in there, that most everything at university level is slow.
No,
very slow.
It's slow. And you'd be surprised because you think, oh, it's a university, so it's got to be pretty advanced and contemporary, and people are free thinkers, and I think that's probably the problem there. Everybody's got a PhD mostly, and everyone's smarter than the other, and everybody's conferencing everything to the very end, to the very last detail, and minutiae.
So as you were rising up through there, was there anyone that you looked up to or studied or really paid attention to as this is someone you admired and wanted to emulate in some way?
Yeah. Actually, I would say there was several. I would say the first one would be Olarotimi.
Olarotimi.
Who's happened also to be my maternal uncle.
Huh.
And he was at a university, and he was directing a theater company, and he eventually became a dean, and he never really sacrificed his art, even while he was doing the 9 to 5 dean job. I mean, he comes straight to rehearsals. And I said, wow, that's, and the other one I would say is Wole Soyinka, who, was also, who won the Nobel Prize and was also my instructor and my mentor in college.
Aren't you lucky? And that was very lucky.
Very lucky. And, we're still in contact today. He turns 90 this year.
Wow.
So that's another person who basically who was also chair of the department. But while he was chair of the department, he was turning out plays and always in production, and was at the same time running school. So yeah, there are people like that I look on, and then when eventually I got out of grad school and got into the university, there's Malefikedi Asante, who was my doctoral dissertation supervisor, and is chair at Temple University, where I received the PhD, who to date he just turned 80. To date, he's written 102 books.
102 books?
Yeah, 102 books. He went to UCLA.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, this guy writes like 2 books a year, a book a year. And, and I mean, I'm talking about books. I mean, single author, he does very little creative writing, but he does, because he's just written his autobiography. But he's a social thinker. His area was communication, started a whole new field in African American studies, became the first person to see, in terms of education in the United States, what can we do to make it better and make a better society? There's this big elephant in the room that nobody in the USA wants to address, which is the issue of race. which has been here and is going to continue to be with us for a long time if we don't find a way to educate people so that that becomes something where we get better incrementally as a people.
What do you think we need to do to make that happen?
I think education.
Education.
Kids education, because teachers can't teach what they don't know. And when young kids come into kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and what they read is where their perception comes from. The kind of knowledge they receive is what they take with them. And if it's not in the books, if it's not something that they were taught to pay attention to, I don't think as a society we would heal. That is something that hangs over each generation as time goes on. And it's something that's got to, I think, for a society to move on. I mean, destruction comes from within, not from without. So if we're all still, after 500 years, still strangers to ourselves, which is the truth, this is a society where every group is a stranger to the other. E pluribus unum. E pluribus is out of many come one.
Indeed.
Those who kind of formulated that this would be a nation where out of many would come one, I think they understood that that would be a Herculean challenge. And I mean, that experiment, which is occurring in this only one place in the world, no other country has declared that, well, maybe South Africa to a degree, but the US's experiment is a very unique one. And it's one that should be taken very seriously because it ultimately would determine the future of humanity.
For sure. And it is a generational thing. It gets passed along, passed down and down.
Yes, very much so. It gets passed down from one to the next. And I think at this point, there's certain things we really shouldn't even be discussing in terms of the way we interact or what is, I mean, we're about to have an election now, and, I mean, race is already a factor in it.
Race, unfortunately, has been a factor for a long time. It's just a lot louder right now.
Yeah, it's a lot louder, and also because, I mean, everybody's got access to a cell phone, Instagram, Facebook, So I think for that, thankfully, we get to see much more, or maybe tragically, we get to see much more and hear much more shocking events by the day.
Is this the reason why you focus in your artistic work, in your writing work, in your directing work on socially relevant topics?
Yes. I think I kind of went to a school where the teaching and the thinking was never art for art's sake. Your art had to be doing something socially conscious, politically conscious, economically conscious. Your art had to be doing something that raised humanity, such that your art was bigger than you, such that once you were done with the art, you had made humanity a better place. You leave it a better place.
Leave it better than you found it.
Because ultimately, you know what? We're never here permanently. We come, and the same way we come, we go. The world goes on. And I think the only one thing we could do is that we've left a better legacy. We've made it better, and we could be satisfied wherever we are, if we're consciously spirit or unconsciously spirit, or even just dead and there's no other form of existence.
So for you, how does art do that?
Art does that in the message, the topics you pick, the messaging you put out in your art, the subject matters you focus on. I mean, that's not to say you don't entertain while you educate, but in a lot of ways, you have a responsibility as an artist. You have a gift that you take for granted, because I'm always shocked when I talk to my friends in engineering or in medicine, and they don't have any sense of imagination. When they say, well, where did that come from? How did you think of that? Man, how are you putting this together? So then you start to understand that, it's not everybody's endowed with this gift that a group of you have.
Well, that's for sure. Artists are unique on this planet.
Yeah.
And we do have a responsibility.
Yes, we do. A major one. That's why we have this gift.
And you have the ability to work in various art forms, sort of all within one big umbrella called entertainment, I guess, or you're dealing with theater and movies and so on. Do you think of theater as the primary focus that you have in your life, or is it everything?
I would say everything in terms of the realization. Theater is a foundation. It's the foundation,
The great foundation.
great foundation. And there's one thing somebody mentioned at a conference I went to in China, and it was an AI conference. And we're looking at how AI and technology was, and this, your volume stages and all that. And he was a much older man. And he said, no matter what happens with technology, with AI, says there's one thing we're always going to come back to, and that is human beings wanting to sit down and watch other human beings like
Oh yeah. Oh, big
yeah.
time.
So, said it will get to a point where, yeah, we have all this technology and AI and all, and people are watching animation and all that. And, but he said there's one thing which is the always, no matter how many movie theaters you go to and how many TVs you're watching or how much you're watching on your iPod or iPhone, there would always be a special place where you could always go sit down and watch other human beings.
It's the campfire. We have to go back to the campfire and sit around it and look at each other in the eye.
Yes. So you're right in the sense that for me, that's always the basic foundation. So whether I'm going into documentary to talk about something on a documentary level, I still need to see characters. I need to understand the structure, the plot, motive, the narrative. And, the term in theater we use, well, you're right, a deus ex machine,
Deus ex machina, sure.
machina, yeah, So even while you're working on a documentary, you might come back and go, wait a minute now, this sounds like a deus ex machina. Maybe come on now. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you didn't do a thorough analysis to arrive there for your audience. You just did a quick job and then just try to wrap it up quickly,
So for the listeners who don't know, Deus ex machina is an old Greek term that means a machine from the gods. In the old plays, they used to just at the end of the play, some character would drop down from the heavens using a block and fall system, and they would tell you how everything resolved. We can't tolerate that today. It has to resolve within the story, right?
Yes. It has to resolve within the story.
That's too simple.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I laugh because I'm looking at I'm thinking about, all the wars in the world today, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, China, Taiwan, and I'm thinking, man, that Duke's Ex Machina would have been probably a very good thing to end it.
Oh, that would be excellent.
Wrap it up.
We're not likely to see that anytime soon.
Wrap it up, come on, guys, wrap it up. Let's stop this,
So when you're writing, because you're a relatively prolific writer, do you prefer to write plays, screenplays, books? Do you have a preference, articles?
No, actually, no. It depends on how I see it. If I see it on stage, then, if it plays out in my head as a stage thing, then it's stage. If it plays out in my head as, no, you can't do this on stage, this has to be documentary, because for the reasons of getting it to the audience, or audience consumption is better on stage on this, on screen on this, and you would need a lot of whatever it is, maybe B-roll, because you can't perform B-roll on stage and it's too confusing. And what you're digging for is looking at evidence and facts, and so it all depends on how it plays. Sometimes it could be just a pure, fictional writing narrative. Just write the story first and then see, if ultimately this could be a feature, or it would lend itself to even being a historical staging of something.
I tend to think of the theater as we're seeing the actual size of the human, the full body of the human, and we're seeing usually a narrowly focused concept or idea. And I think of movies as two things. It's wide open spaces, which we can do, and then really close-up shots of faces and eyes.
You're correct. In terms of movies, you say that, and I always think in my head, as filmmakers, we're plastic surgeons. and you're sending an image. Basically, you're deciding where you want your close-ups, where you want your camera to go. Basically, where you want your camera to go is what you want the audience to see. On stage, you don't have that choice.
You have no control over where the audience is looking.
No control. And I say that to everybody on stage. We're working through the show. So listen, this is stage. You might be yelling there with a knife, trying to run down something, and the audience is looking at your refrigerator on stage, wondering, how does that refrigerator place in terms of space and age? So basically, the audience is free to just look anywhere at any time.
We do have some tricks, but not like the movie camera does. We can take and just put a single light on a certain spot, and it's the only thing you can see.
Yeah.
We can do that kind of focus, and we can do loud noises in a place on stage, and people will look at that or listen to that. But a movie, it's really very much what the director wants you to see and hear.
Yeah, that's it.
So I'm wondering, how many languages do you speak?
But 4 of them.
4.
Yeah.
Okay, and when you write, are you writing in your native language or are you writing in English? What do you write in?
You know, I grew up in a country and a time when, and I'm answering that to answer this, and which is still the case, was a British colony. It was owned by the Queen and the King of England.
Mm-hmm.
And in those colonies, this is one of the colonies in West Africa, in Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Yeah, a British colony. In the British colonies, you are forced to speak English. English becomes the lingua franca. As you go through public school or private school, you're forbidden from speaking the indigenous language.
Forbidden from it?
Yes. You could earn a suspension.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes. You could earn a suspension for what they call speaking vernacular.
Well, that's not right.
So what happens? Oh, well, hey, that was the way colonization works. Because you come in and you take a territory in 1886, 1887. It's a British country now, a French country, and it's right next to a British country. The national language becomes English if it's owned by the British. The national language is French if it's owned by the French. The national language is Spanish if it's a Spanish-owned colony. National language Portuguese if the Portuguese got there. There's actually 2 countries where the national language was German because the Germans owned the colony was Togo and Cameroon. No, 3. Togo, Cameroon, and Tanzania.
Okay.
Now, at the end of what you call, or middle of what you call World War II, European War II, to punish the Germans, the Europeans came together and took the German colonies in Africa. Togo, they gave to the French. Tanzania, they gave to the British. Now there's one more colony left. It's called Cameroon. So that there was no misunderstanding among them, they split Cameroon into 2. The British took half, the French took half. So Cameroon is the only country today on the continent of Africa where French and English are both the lingua franca, the national languages.
Interesting.
Just like Canada, where you have French and English. So Cameroon, as a consequence of that war, becomes the only colony in Africa that 2 languages are spoken. So again, in the partition of Africa, where a lot of the indigenous language was forbidden, you had to go to school reading English, and you read A for apple, even though the kind of apples in the books do not grow in tropical countries. Isn't that something? You open the book, it says A for apple. Here you are in kindergarten. A for apple, and you look at this.
What's an apple?
Thing and think, we don't have that in the tropics. First letter you learn, and the first illustration that goes with the letter is foreign to you already.
That must present real challenges as a kid.
Yeah, well, you as a kid, you don't think about that. You just go with it.
That's true.
Yeah, you just go with it. You don't know any better, right?
You soak all that up as a kid.
Yeah, you soak it up, and you say, okay, all right. English becomes a language I talk in, and and your parents work very hard not to speak the indigenous language around you or to you because they don't want you to go use it in school and then earn a suspension or something for or penalization for them brought in because you spoke vernacular.
So you write in English then?
Yes.
Do you then translate your own work into other languages?
No, because
leave it in English.
Yes, leave it in English. In many ways, because in the other languages, even though you speak it, you don't know how to write it as well as you were forced or made, because all your exams, don't forget, all your exams are written in English. All the signs on the streets are in English.
Well, and you're forbidden to use the other languages.
You can't. And there was a point where you couldn't even wear traditional clothing to school. We had uniforms, but if there was a school event and you had to come in regular clothing, you couldn't put on anything traditional. Pretty much, I think this is why I relate a lot with the Native American plight, because actually it's in Pennsylvania. It's at the Phillips Academy.
Phillips Academy?
Yeah, which was basically what happened there. Was a lot of Native indigenous children were sent there to be educated and stripped of their indigenous names, basically, and had to learn in English and couldn't speak because they were mixed with other kids from different ethnic or indigenous groups. English became the lingua franca, the currency, and they were kind of distanced from their own cultural heritage. And again, I was on the Southern Youth land with Southern Youth folks in Ignacio and writing a play there with the Southern Youths. It was shocking that there were only 2 older youth members that spoke the language.
Only 2?
Only 2. And so they started up.
What did they speak? Mostly English?
Yeah, English. That's all they spoke. And I recall, the ethnic indigenous medicine man of wisdom on that Southern Youth indigenous land was a man named Eddie Bucks. May his soul rest in peace. I got a lot of the orature and oral history from him as I was writing. And there were books that had been written by, some American explorers, etc., about Southern Youth people. But other than reading that Western canon writing, or perspective, I needed to hear from somebody who lived that life and whose culture was and who got removed to that academy and who actually served in the Navy, the US Navy, and came back from the Navy and decided he didn't belong and needed to kind of go back to the reservation where he was taken from, basically. And that thirst made him start to learn the language from the elders at the time. And a lot of people wouldn't affiliate with him. And, why do you want to learn that stuff? We're all speaking English. Why do you want to go so deep into the traditions? It's forbidden.
It's deep in their blood.
Yeah, but that was the effect of colonization, where they were told everything indigenous was wrong and everything Western was correct. And so and so it's the same thing with colonization on the continent. Is you remove from your culture right on your land and made to think and talk and write. So you know the indigenous language, but you can't really write it.
So tell us what Ouray is about.
When I got to Colorado, one of the things I was yearning for badly in Colorado was, I was coming from New York, was to find the native peoples and talk with native indigenous peoples. And so I really looked forward to that. And then I realized that in the department of theater where I was, they had never done a Native American play, never done an indigenous play, and I thought, well, this university has been here since 18 what? This is 1991, 92. You guys have never done an indigenous play? Well, they said, well, because we can't find one. And so I said, would it be okay then if I started to do research on writing one? And they said, well, yeah, knock yourself out. So, which is good.
They're not likely to get in your way if you're going to go write it.
Yeah, so long as you don't miss teaching your classes, and
exactly
coming to meetings and all that. So checking around town and looking at Colorado history, Colorado, like all places, was indigenous peoples, and they got moved from Denver and that whole area and got moved to a quarter of the state. And then they found out that the quarter of the state they had moved them to had actually a lot of minerals, more minerals than you could find in Denver, more gold, more stuff. So they moved them away from there again and moved them to a corner, the four corners of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. They moved them to the corner there, and it's a town called Ignacio. The person who was leading this was a guy named Ure, Ouray. I drove down the 8 hours from Denver to the res, and I got a lot of permissions from people to, please talk and allow me to come on. And I had a good meeting, and I convinced the leaders, the elders, that we needed to write a play to commemorate Ure and the struggles of the youths at the time, because there was no such thing, and I'm in a theater department and I want to see done. And of course there was the distrust of an outsider, and but allowing me to work with Chief Eddie Box, and him spending a lot of time with him, and he interrogating me and asking me a lot of questions, and gauged my level of understanding was similar. And I'd been through the same kind of experiences. And
you had a parallel experience in a very different culture.
And we had similar practices in some ways of, traditional healing and that kind of stuff. And that's where the journey began, basically. And I wrote based on a lot of narratives that I received, oral history and combination of works, things that I read. And we created the play, and I, insisted that I didn't want the copyright. I wanted, it would be important that the Southern Youth Council keep the copyright.
That's really generous of you.
Well, to me was this whole idea of ownership it's really very Western and individualistic. And I understood basically that this is their story. And even though in writing it had to be Niyi Coker in association with the Southern Youth Tribal Council, even though I dislike that word tribe.
I assume that made them trust you even further.
Oh, yes. Because I said I would never, ever attempt to, it's their story. If I want to do it, I would come ask permission from them. And so one of the other things that they did was translate the script into the youth language, which I'm very happy they did. A guy named Lee Briggs, may his soul rest in peace, led that charge for, they have a small library on the reservation now, educational center, so he led that. And I'm really glad, that because he wanted that story preserved in the language and thought.
Were you able to see it produced in the Ute language?
Yes, or part of our production, basically, it wasn't all in English. Oh, yeah. We reverted to some productions like, those that were done on the reservation were done in Ute.
Did you direct it as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, the directing was done yes, I directed it in English. And so the translations, the actors worked on the translations and followed the same stage direction. But now they were speaking it in Ute, and, and it helped that, a lot of the songs were already native indigenous songs, so where the songs would come in and the dialogue, I learned a lot from that, because you could see that when they did it in English, some of the issues as a director that you'd have with actors, where you'd say, no, I want you to internalize that. Somebody just says, one character says something to you, you don't just react, you internalize what the person just said. And that internalization produces the reaction spontaneously in your acting. Otherwise your audience isn't going to believe it. The audience is there as a witness, and they're watching, and they need to see you internalize something. I tell you what happened when it was done in Ute. I didn't have to give that note.
Really? Why?
Yes, because it was being done in a language that was theirs, that they were now learning, and they were understanding much quicker. And so when you're speaking a language now that's yours and first, your reaction, your internalization is real because those words mean something to you. Those words that you're hearing or those words that are being said mean something to you.
So it doesn't feel like they're actually interpreting anything. It feels real.
Yes.
Because most acting is an interpretation of something.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say were the biggest challenges that you faced, not only in writing it, but then in staging it as well? What were those challenges and how did you overcome those?
I would say the challenges became financing.
Fine.
Yeah.
It always boils down to money, doesn't it?
The challenges became financing. Financing in the sense that the group came up from Ignacio to Denver, and I had received a series of grants from the university, some from an organization outside, some from a place called the Chinook Fund, and the reality of that the funding was not sustained, but that we were running out. And,
You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like theater to me. There's no money. There's never any money.
Oh, it'd be real theater if the actors got wind of that. Guess what? Just keep going, man. At the end of the week, we're not sure where the check's gonna come from, but just keep going.
I mean, that is so right in the pocket of what we go through every day in Hollywood, in the theater, on Broadway. There's never enough money, one way or another.
Never enough, not for the right thing.
Even your $100 million budgeted movies, there's never enough money.
If it's $100 million, trust me, that for me, that is enough.
That's enough. Yeah, for me too. Yeah.
That's enough. I mean, for 100 million, we could do 100 of them if we do.
So, okay, what do you enjoy about directing? What is it about directing that gives you joy?
The collaboration, the fact that in that process, you could encourage the best out of each of your artists, whether it's your scene designer, your prop person, your costume person, your light designer, your lighting person, your sound mixers. The fact that you come through a journey with maybe 10, 12, 14, 15 people, depending on how large your cast is. And at the beginning, you probably all didn't like each other.
Right.
There were some strange, interpersonal things going on. But you all collectively come together and this is the mission. And then opening night comes and everybody loves everybody and everybody's wishing everybody the very best. And finally it opens and that closing night is always a downer, but it's an upper in the sense that the cast puts forth its best foot. Solid production. I mean, not that they didn't for the rest, but they realized that we're no longer a family after this. That unit and bond of meeting every night and every day and is about to end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a little tiny family that's forced on one another that then splits up.
Yes, splits up, but it's a shared experience. There's a magic about it.
There's a total magic about it, especially like you say, opening night, because more often than not, at least my experience has been, you're not sure the day before you open whether you're good enough to open. Yeah. And somehow something magical happens and you open on opening night and all's well.
Yes, and all is well. And it's just a magical experience in a bubble that you hold in your memory. And when your audience refers to it, 5 years ago, I saw the production of such and such thing, and how that changed their lives or changed their sons' lives or daughters' lives, or it spoke to them in some way, it helped them understand certain things. You can't ask for a better gift.
You really can't. And frequently, at least in my experience, even shows that were challenging, difficult, full of blood, sweat, and tears, as we say, whatever that was, whatever you went through that was maybe very unpleasant or difficult, years later, you look back on it fondly anyway.
Yes, you do. You look, no,
And if
yeah, you do.
and if it works out that it's beautiful when you go to opening night, you look back on it even more fondly.
Very much so. I don't think we can quantify it.
You can't quantify it. It's pure emotion. It's pure emotion.
We're so gifted and fortunate to have that continuously.
So how long were you at the directing game before you thought to yourself, you know what, I really am a pretty good director? Was it right away or did it take you a while?
Actually, right from the bat, I've always had the natural instinct. I've always had the natural diplomatic, let's do it together collectively. I would say it was probably after my work with the Southern youths did I feel I'm pretty good at this. I say that because certain things happened off the set, on the set.
That's when you started to feel like you were truly in command of that gift.
Yes, because again, they became cultural clashes. Don't forget the technical crew are not indigenous people. The technical crew are the university of the university technical crew, mainly Euro Americans, the box office people, the people who run the theater, walk around the theater, and people that not they're coming into a space that's not indigenous and it's off the reservation, so to speak, right?
Sure. And in fact, as I understand it, the laws on the reservation are different from the standard state or US laws.
Yeah. And at that point is when you begin to see the clashes actualize. You begin to see that.
Is it a cultural clash?
Yes, cultural, very cultural.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a certain way you talk to people that our Euro colleagues were being rude or anything. It was just cold and curt, There was no need for what you might call an emotional courtesy or, courteousness.
You have a job to do and you're doing your job.
That's it. And you know how most folks in tech would talk to you,
sure,
tell you what you should do and what you can't do and the way it's told. Yeah, and at that point, bringing folks to understand and have a rapprochement, a meeting of the mind, understanding that, this is not just being a director, this is being culturally sensitive and helping each other. Now, as a director, you're now helping navigate cultures and interpret cultures.
Was it a truly fulfilling experience for you? It like really filled your soul up, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, that did. Oh, that did.
So I have to ask you, we want to move along to other aspects of your career and certainly in terms of your skills and talents. I'm fascinated by this story of Ota Benga. Tell us about Ota Benga and this documentary you made.
Oh, yeah, Ota Benga. I wouldn't have believed it myself, too, that you could take a human being and put him in the zoo.
In the zoo. This is unbelievable.
The zoo, and lock him up in the zoo and let him spend the night in the zoo with the chimpanzees and the orangutans. And,
This was an experiment somebody was trying to do?
It was more than an experiment. It went beyond experiment to, this was the only place you could put him.
Oh, gosh. That's unreal.
And this is in the Bronx.
In the Bronx.
Yeah, 1905. So in the Bronx Zoo.
Was he a slave?
No. Well, you could say he was because he was captured. But then don't forget, slavery was outlawed in 18.
When you say he was he captured because he was a criminal?
No. Well, he was in the Congo, and the Congo was owned by Belgium. King Leopold owned the Congo as part of this arrangement with, dividing up Africa, and the British took part, the French took part. Now, while Leopold ran the Congo, first of all, it's good to put out there that Leopold, in the partition of Africa, wanted 5 times the land of Belgium.
Okay.
As his cut in Africa, then he could be the referee the others as to who would take one, and, so that he got his own cut. And his cut was the Congo. That's why it's called the Belgian Congo. While the enslavement had ended, the Congo, Belgium, don't forget, had its own different rules and laws. They were not bringing Africans to the Congo. They were making them dig for metals and rubber. Rubber was the big thing back then, rubber. Cars were being invented, bicycles, you needed pneumatic tires.
And they were tapping it out of the trees, right?
Yeah, they were tapping it out of the trees. And for those that didn't tap enough, it was, chopping off their hands and legs,
Oh, boy.
At that point, Otabenga's village had been raided. And of course, the Belgian army was in the Congo and they'd raided his village and massacred all the women and children and, dragged them off to work on other plantations. And, they just chartered people, took them to go work on plantations. So there was a kind of slavery going on in the Congo. So Otabenga attacked the Force Publique. When he got home, didn't find his wife and kids, realized they'd been taken by the Belgian Force Publique. He went to the Force Publique and attacked. And solitary attack, he got chained down and locked up. An American missionary named Werner was commissioned by the St. Louis World's Fair to go bring them people from Africa, to go bring some people from Africa, because the St. Louis World's Fair was actually the beginning of the field of anthropology. And a guy named Dr. Louis McGee, in trying to start this field of anthropology at the St. Louis World's Fair, wanted different people from different ethnicities. Even Geronimo was actually there too.
Geronimo.
Yeah, Geronimo. Geronimo, yeah, he was there as well. They brought in people from the Igrats. They brought in people from the Philippines, Malaysia, India, So basically, the experiment was to rank humanity from its highest culmination to the lowest. So they wanted people at the park, at the fairs, so that the anthropologists could study them all and determine that the highest people on the human spectrum are Caucasians. And then you go down Asians, and they could watch them right there, and the lowest would be the Black people and would be then the missing link between man and ape.
Oh, man.
So Werner basically at the end of the fair, he was supposed to bring, I think, capture 25 or 30. He only brought back 2 or 3. And, so his mission failed as far as they were concerned. He couldn't buy enough or capture enough people to bring back. So at the end of it, he basically, sold Otabenga to the zoo in the Bronx, because the zoo would be paying him a certain amount of money, basically, right? So he became an attraction at the zoo, because 1905, Darwin had written The Evolution of Species. And the way people saw the book, The Evolution of Species, is that, human beings as a result of evolution, not creation. Creationism is, you go to church, you believe in God, you say Adam and Eve, it's the Bible. Evolutionism is that we came from something, and evolution and, blah, blah, blah. And so for them to say, here is the missing link, and you could see him at the zoo with the chimpanzees and orangutan, that's where the Bronx Zoo has made its highest profit to date.
That's wild.
And so basically, he was at the zoo, and people, rather than go to church on Sunday, would go to the zoo, pay the fare, go to the zoo, see the wild man at the zoo, Was
he billed as the missing link?
Yes. This is basically not him, but basically his race, his group. Don't forget now, we've just come out of the Civil War, Darwin writes Evolution of Species. There's a debate in Congress as to where do we put this. They're no longer 3/4 of the people. They're free now. In the Constitution, there were 3/4 of a people, but now they're going to be one person. How can they be one person? Where did they? So this is the debate of the time. This is what the times were like. So there was this curiosity about, because there was a time actually they did the Casino de Paris, where they brought in Black boxers from the USA.
Right.
In again, 1909, 1907, but again, it's, looking at Black bodies, basically the inquisitiveness. Look at, what's the name, who was put in a zoo, in a cage, just because of her backside, Lady Hottentot, Sarah Batman. It wasn't until recently, now you have a lot of women now going to do the Botox and, But when she had natural buttocks was
Botox?
Botox, yeah, pumping it in their backsides, right?
Right.
And, but Sarah Batman had a natural backside. And so for that, she was a species of inquiry, and they took her and put her in, was it in Switzerland or in, they just returned her bones.
They celebrated her because of her backside?
That's it. And not celebrated, put her up as something to be watched, to be gazed upon.
Some strange anomaly.
Strange anomaly, which people pay to come to see. So it was the same with Otabenga. And so
this is madness.
Yeah, it's the same. So that kind of interests me in telling that story, because to me it was really extreme, So eventually it was the pastors from churches that went to the mayor and said, this man is not good for business. You got to get him out of here. It's not good for church business,
What was the biggest surprise you found along the way?
That till to date, we don't know where he's buried.
Really?
Yeah.
They hid the body. They did something with the body.
Yeah, very much so. And the end of the documentary basically is we did a search. We went every place. There were people who actually asked for his body. And when they said he committed suicide, I couldn't prove it wasn't suicide in the documentary. So I just told it as they said he committed suicide, put a gun to him and killed himself.
Is the documentary available anywhere?
Oh, yes, it's available. You go on, it used to be on Amazon. I will go back there and see if it's on there, but it's actually on, what do you call it? It's on YouTube now, actually.
It's on YouTube?
Yes. Just go on YouTube and, type in Otabenga Human in the Zoo, Niyi Coker. I know recently somebody tried to do something like that as well, but no, that would be a different one. Mine would be Otabenga Human at the Zoo with my name on it.
I think that sounds both fascinating and horrifying all at the same time.
And horrifying, yeah. It's only 1 hour documentary. It's not, and it took 10 years to make. So
10 years.
Yes.
And let me guess, the biggest challenge was money.
No, ironically, it wasn't, because I had an endowed professorship in that.
Well, there you go.
Ironically, wasn't. It was that the story just kept getting bigger. Each time I thought I was at the end, it got bigger. Can you imagine being told that Werner's grandson is alive?
Wow.
While you're working on the documentary by accident, and that his grandson lives in South Carolina?
Oh.
And he might be willing to talk to you. And he has all his grandfather's documents, his grandfather who went and kidnapped Otabenga.
You suddenly opened up a whole new wealth of riches.
Wealth of riches. And so the story changes, because now you could get his own direct, information on, what his grandfather did and his perspective and what his grandfather's last words were. And, that changes the story, changes the complexity of the story. And you're like, whoa, okay. And while you're working on it, then you hear, oh, by the way, there's a museum in Paris where they actually found some tapes, actual B-roll tapes of that time.
Tapes or film?
Film, sorry. The film, they actually had film.
Right.
Silent film, and that somebody had found it and they were going to be projecting it in Paris at Museum Brulé. So you want to see the film too. Were
you able to incorporate that into the movie?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the things as you work, things are happening. And then you hear, oh, by the way, there's a Darwin conference happening at Oxford about the evolution of the species. And so suddenly you're like, pause, I got to go to that Darwin conference. It's 3 months from now, 4 months from now, but I'm taking a camera there.
So the next thing you know, 10 years goes by.
10 years goes by. And then while you're cutting in the studio, you have the riots happening in St. Louis.
Oh my goodness. I have to know, how long was he actually in the zoo?
He was in the zoo for 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, about 2 years.
Living with the other animals?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
That is really horrifying. Did he become one with them?
He was friendly with them, and the funny part was they paraded him in a white suit.
In a white suit?
Yeah, because at that point there was a lot of protests from certain people who were like, it's wrong to put a man in a zoo. It's wrong to put a man in a zoo.
Yeah, well, it is wrong to put a man in a zoo.
Yeah, well, so they put him in a white suit. Said, "All right, okay, he'll be the one in the suit."
But how did he survive without being harmed by, some wild animal.
The major photograph of him is if you Google him, the prime photograph, which I couldn't get trademark for to use, was somebody else has used it, is him carrying one of the apes.
Really?
Yeah, with the ape just, cuddle around his.
So they actually bonded.
Yeah.
And doesn't that make sense? Otherwise, I think they probably would have killed him.
Oh, yeah, he would have been dead. He would have been dead.
For sure.
Yeah, because, the things when they came in to throw, and this is in the documentary, when they would come in to feed, and the New York Times reports it. People come to the zoo and they're throwing things at the chimps and the monkeys and the bananas and stuff. That's the same way they're throwing food at him, right?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
My goodness. I will definitely check that out. And I think anybody that's listening to this, you should check out this documentary as well, Otto Benga. That's so wrong. It's not to be believed.
It was so shocking to me. So I couldn't do it as a stage play. I'm like, no, that's not a stage play. That's not a musical. Well, if one had enough money to do a good movie, it would be a great movie, to do in terms of a narrative.
You know what I have to tell you? I think it would make an incredible musical.
Wow.
It would make an incredible musical.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Very unique and very powerful. Could be done very powerfully. Well, I've been speaking for a little more than an hour now to just the most amazing person I've talked to in quite some time, Dr. Niyi Coker Jr. And we're going to wind the show down a little bit. And I'm wondering, in all of your many, many worldwide experiences, can you share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, or just plain funny?
Yes. Let me share one. This one is an experience from my time at the University of Wyoming. This one is, I think, very appropriate as to why we have to take education seriously. And, this whole thing about stuff on the curriculum it's not going to harm people, it's going to help people. I'll tell you what that is. The University of Wyoming basketball team is known as what? The Cowboys.
The Cowboys?
The Cowboys. The University of Utah team is known as the Utes.
Okay.
So now you can imagine the kind of atmosphere, euphoria, and that kind of place when University of Wyoming is going to play University of Utah in a basketball game. It's going to be the Cowboys versus the Utes. The Utes are Native peoples. The Cowboys, we know what happened with Cowboys and where the Cowboys basically that we know. They're Black Cowboys, where the Cowboys, the image of the cowboy on TV. So at halftime, students usually come with their mascot and they do all kinds of things at halftime to entertain the crowd. And so a student who's one of the boosters or supporters of the Wyoming Cowboy team walks into an American Indian Studies study area and says, "Hey guys, how you all doing? Is it okay? Could you all get dressed up in your costumes and bring the kids with you and some ladies and all that, girls?" And at halftime, me and my buddies will come in cowboy uniform, cowboy outfits and shoot you all dead and drag you up the court. $20 each. It didn't end well. Because he repeated it 2 or 3 more times.
Oh my goodness.
Let's just say that student could have lost his life.
I imagine.
That student, even after the matters were over and I, said, and he came to thank me for interceding and helping him out and getting him out of the situation and, physically, helping him get out of there. He still didn't understand what he'd done wrong.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
And his major was elementary education. Yes. So basically, it's your education or miseducation could kill you. And I just could never stop thinking, man, you mean this guy took a loan to come to college? And that was many years ago. That was 94, 95. So
you're all the way back to your early discussion about education and how important it is.
Yes. And so for that part, I think ignorance is costly too. And basically, if he'd never learned anything through elementary school, junior high, high school, and now he was in college and majoring in elementary education, and that cultural, historical aspect was totally, didn't mean anything to him.
There was an example of something where ignorance was not bliss.
No, it wasn't bliss. It wasn't bliss.
Holy mackerel. So, all right, last question for you today, Niyi. You've given us a huge amount of stuff to chew on today, and really a lot of advice along the way about things we can think about and do and how we should look at the world. But I'm wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to either students or those coming up in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level?
What matters the most is your character. It's not how much money you have. It's not what you've accomplished. It's not what you're going to accomplish. It's not the failures. It's your character. Your character is everything. Your character is the most, I think that is what you have to come out with. That's what you go in with. And the work would always end. Everybody's got a window of time when you're relevant, and then your time ends and you're out of there, and, and making sure that that character and that integrity are not violated, compromised. I mean, you should always be compromising, but don't get compromised. Yeah, that's very important, your character.
And that's something you carry with you no matter where you are or what you're doing. I think that's extremely wise advice, and not always well thought through by many people in and out of the arts about whether they're presenting themselves with a good character. And I think that's extremely wise advice. Dr. Niyi Coker, this has been an absolutely marvelous hour plus on StoryBeat today, and I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and particularly for your fantastic stories and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.